Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Just for Dara. This is Dara Senior, your host, and on today's special episode, we have a guest, which, as you guys can kind of tell by the title, which I haven't fully finalized the title yet, but basically, this is a mini series for the summer where I'm talking with different people who are younger than what people would perceive as the age to like start making differences or changes in this world. So today I have Dania Ibrahim, who is here to discuss her role in activism and just different things like that. So I also wanted to talk about how I met her anyways, which was so in the beginning of the summer, I did this like 2-week workshop with diplomacy and leadership and different things like that. So we had a lot of different speakers who came and talked to us about different things in regards to just being a diplomatic person and like leadership skills and things like that. So Dania was actually one of our guest speakers, and her presentation really resonated to me to where I was like, okay, like I really hope that what she said and what her message was like can be put out to an even broader group. So that's why then I contacted her and asked her if she could join me on this episode, which I'm really excited that she agreed to. So yeah, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much for having me here, Dara. I am honored that you really enjoyed my talk at the AIDL workshop, and I'm really happy to be speaking with you again. I think it's awesome that you host this podcast, and I'm honored to be able to share a little bit about my story and a little bit about myself. My name is Dania Ibrahim. I'm currently a graduate student working in education research. I focus on learning methods and education equity. So all of the external factors that influence students' abilities to interact with their educational experiences. And that's where my main passions are right now. But outside of that, I serve in the activism space in some different areas. And I've worn some different hats in the past as well. Some of them being a TEDx director and encouraging communication among different people in my undergraduate institution. In other areas, I work in Palestinian activism, which I can speak on a little bit more later. As well as encouraging interfaith dialogue and connections between people of different backgrounds. That's where most of my work has stemmed from.
Okay, thank you so much. So we just have like a few prompts that are just going to get the conversation started. So the first question or prompt is, from what age did you know that you wanted to start working in activism?
So I don't think there was ever a really conscious choice to decide to start working in activism. I've always been in the activism sphere. I'm Palestinian. Both of my parents were born in Palestine. And so being a Palestinian person comes with a lot of beautiful, rich background, culture, history, but it also comes with some challenges because it's a highly contested area and a very politicized area. And so my existence from my childhood as a Palestinian woman was always politicized. And so activism was something that I was just born into and grew into because my parents would talk to us about the Palestinian cause, would take us to protests as children. I think that my first protest I was at was when I was 2 years old in a stroller. And so this was in a community that I was always around. I was always around people that were advocating for the voiceless, were always standing up for the causes that they believed in and putting in that strength and putting in that effort. And so I grew up around that. And my parents always took us to community events to help promote the Palestinian cause and also to support some of the other identities that we hold. We supported that Arab community a lot, which is also a marginalized group of people. And so because of my identities, because of who I was, I grew up in this space. Because of my parents, I was already going to these events and learning about the people that serve in these areas. And it kind of just happened naturally. Like my parents always taught me to care a lot about the voiceless and to stand up for who I am. And because I am in those marginalized populations, I grew up continuing to speak on my own behalf and for those that don't exactly have spots at the table, and taking those opportunities that I had to be able to speak. And so it's something that I have always been around, have grown into, and then continued to take more active roles in as I got older and was able to take some of the activism on my own shoulders rather than it being something that I was doing with my family. But it was definitely a natural progression.
Yeah, I think that it's really, I guess, interesting and honestly really like inspiring the fact that you were saying that like your activism started from like a young age, like your parents would take you to protest, and then from there, like you were just kind of always in that circle. And I think that speaks a lot of volume because I know for me, like the first time I really looked at like um, activism in that like viewpoint and like that sphere, and looking at like, oh, what would it be like if I was to go and participate in a protest and things like that, was more with the Black Lives Matter protests that were happening in 2020. Like that started a lot then. And although they started before that, but at that time I think it was a lot heavier than before. So with that, I know that I kind of felt like I wasn't really doing anything, just sitting at home. And although I wasn't actually allowed to go to a protest, although I did talk about it with my parents, but they just said like it wasn't really that safe or whatever, which is understandable. But I think that, yeah, like before that age, and at that time I was 13 turning 14. So I think before that, it definitely never came to my mind of, oh, how can I like go out and try to make a difference and try to make a change in that way. So I think it's, yeah, I definitely think it's really interesting and honestly really amazing that you started doing that from such an early age.
I was
So
lucky that I had people to guide me for
yeah,
sure.
I definitely think that probably helped with it. So okay, for the next prompt though, to give a little background, well, okay, I guess I'll let you give the background, but it was about if you could share how Picnics for Peace happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So Picnic for Peace, the event that Dar has just mentioned, is a interfaith, intercultural event that began being hosted at high schools, but has grown much since then. And so I guess to be able to explain a little bit more about what the event actually looks like, I'll explain the background. When I was a sophomore in high school in Georgia, there was a strong rise of ISIS, unfortunately, and it was a terrifying time for a lot of people. It was a terrifying time for Muslims because Islamophobia was on the rise. It was a terrifying time for many others because they were unsure about what was going on and were fearful for the general state of the world and for the many people that were losing their lives tragically. And so it was a really tough thing to see as a 10th grader. And this was right when I was beginning to speak out more honestly and proudly about my religion. It was when I had learned a lot more about it. It was when I started wearing the headscarf and engaging in more conversations about it. And I had a lot of personal conversations with people about Islam and Islamophobia and how strongly my religion condemns what ISIS is doing and how much ISIS is not representative of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And through these conversations, a lot of my closer friends were really engaged in learning a lot, but there were a lot of people that just didn't have like that Muslim friend to talk to, and they didn't really have the space to have those conversations. And so one day on the track during track and field practice, a friend of mine came up to me and she had been mentioning a lot. She had been having a lot of these conversations with me and trying to understand more about what was going on and what Islam says about what's happening in terms of ISIS being on the rise. And she was saying kind of like, Dania, it's really nice that we are able to have these conversations one-on-one. But there are so many people that aren't able to have these conversations, that aren't able to understand, that aren't able to get their questions answered and face their misconceptions
Mm-hmm.
in a good manner. Because sometimes the internet is not the best place for it. And at the time, there was less. At the time, social media wasn't as big as it is now, where you could like find your find your local Muslim that's speaking out on these things. It wasn't as easy when I was in high school, and it wasn't as prevalent. And so we decided we wanted to create a platform where people from different religions could come, or people that didn't identify with a religion could come and talk about some of the issues at hand, but also more broadly be able to open like a forum for students to be able to connect with one another and have those kinds of conversations and know that the others that are there are interested in having that conversation. Because at the time it was ISIS that was facing a lot of misconceptions, or it was Islam that was facing misconceptions and ISIS that was doing tragic, horrible things that was making Islam be questioned by many.
Yeah.
But in other times in history, there are several other people from different faith groups that have also faced misconceptions about their religions. And we wanted to create an open forum for everybody. And so that first year, we got the different religious organizations at the high school to come together and to plan an interfaith event in which we brought community leaders and high school speakers and performers from the high school as well to come and speak on a theme. And that year, the theme was how to teach others well about your religion. And there was speakers, taking that theme from whatever angle that they wanted to, community leaders that were like set in the religions. But the bigger thing was that there was just room for conversation between these talks, between these things that were brought up by the community speakers. There was high schoolers that were able to just converse with one another, and we were encouraging that conversation. And it was really beautiful. And it went on to continue another year and spread out more widely to many other religious and spiritual groups at school, and like students that were non-religious but really wanted a voice at that event as well were heavily involved. And the greatest thing about it was that it was interfaith in both its structure and function, in the sense that all of us from these different organizations were planning it together. We were creating real, genuine connections with one another. We were really learning from each other through the planning process itself, and then being able to create an event in which students could come and interact with the rest of the high school. And so that was really beautiful. It continued on. I think it's happened about 5 times since then. It went on to continue at other high schools, at a synagogue, and at a university in Georgia as well. And it was really beautiful seeing the energy of that interfaith event just spread and grow and be able to open these conversations for people. And there was a lot of people that were just grateful that there was a space that they felt comfortable asking some more challenging conversations, and just some really good dialogue was opened up, and stronger connections were really created between the students. I know I felt a lot more connected to my schools when I was able to have these conversations with people, and several others reported the same. And that was what it really was about, just to reduce this pressure on us when we're speaking with others, and opening up that dialogue and making it so that there's a space that we can actually have some of these conversations and learn about one another in a safe, non-judgmental space.
Yeah, I think when I first heard about that, which is when Daniel was talking to us at the workshop about Picnics for Peace and about that event. And I think that with that, just learning how you guys started that when you were just in high school and made this connection between these different people, and whereas a lot of times even adults don't even feel like they even want to try to make that connection or try to make it to where that it's possible to have those conversations, and just realize that the differences that they may have really aren't that different, and that there's a lot of relations that, or a lot of similarities that you can find that then help you to realize that, yeah, that you can easily build a connection off of it. So I definitely think that that was definitely a amazing and beautiful thing, like you were saying before. And then also with like misconceptions about different groups of people, I think that that's like such a dangerous thing, honestly, because a lot of times, like I was saying before, it's like there's a lot of things that are similar between the two groups or between different groups, and people just don't realize it because of those extreme misconceptions and because of these like misunderstandings, that they don't even realize that like it's a lot more similar than one would have thought before. So I definitely think it's really commendable that you guys are able to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Opening conversation early on has such an important domino effect, because the opposite also has a domino effect. And like
Yeah.
the idea of being able to beat that domino effect before it gets worse, like misconceptions can roll into bias and hatred and actions towards different people, and like it grows from like a root misconception or a root misunderstanding. And so just being able to like kind of start those conversations early while we were in high school was really beneficial. And I 100% agree that like the misconceptions can be very dangerous. So anything that we can do to create dialogue and be able to break those apart, break those barriers, is really important.
Yeah. So the next prompt is, have you experienced any backlash through your journey with activism? And if so, how did you respond to it?
So this is a challenging question because it really depends on which activism space I'm in and which type of activism I'm engaging in the sense that, like, for example, with Picnic for Peace, the backlash that we were getting was being able to convince administration that this type of event could be held at a public high school, for example, or that when we did it in college, that it could be comfortably held at a public institution and be like representative of the institution. And so there's backlash in that kind of sense. Sometimes it's bureaucratical backlash. In terms of my activism with Palestine, for example, it's a little bit more directed. I mean, when you go to protests, there's usually counter protests, or when you post things online, there are often people that have different opinions that will share those opinions, and sometimes they'll be shared kindly and productively, and sometimes they're not. And I really really do think that like the more political a statement that I'm making, the more backlash that I'll get. And so it's very dependent on the actual activism space and how political the statement is, because at its core, like when you're talking about, oh, like for example, through Picnic, I want people to communicate and understand each other better. There are going to be people that dislike it, but there's not going to be a lot of people that have very like fervent stances against it. But then when you make a more political statement, which I won't make a political statement on this podcast right now, but like if you make a more political statement about like a governmental structure that you disagree with that is causing, children to suffer, people will attack what you're saying about the governmental structure, but they won't. But if you just stick with saying like, oh, it's really upsetting that these children are suffering, less people will have backlash. So I'm saying like people will agree a lot of times on like, oh, it is bad that children are suffering, but they will disagree so strongly about the statements that are made around that, like about like why the causes for that, like what the cause for those children suffering could be, or like what are these things that are influencing that, or that are causing it? How are our behaviors as human beings leading to that? And so when I'm making statements that are solely humanitarian and solely just pointing out like it is really sad that this person is suffering, or we should connect better on this thing, like when my statements are very palatable, I don't get backlash. And then when I point out the causes and the structures and the systemic issues that lead to these things happening, that's when people tend to really come with the backlash. And so I do receive comments on Instagram that are in disagreement with what I say, or people have come up to me in person when I've spoken or done events, and if I say or do anything that talks about anything political or any of the causes for some of the things that, like some of the bad things that we see going on in the world, that's when people tend to really disagree and tend to share their differing opinions in sometimes unproductive ways. And so it really depends on the event itself, the type of activism, and how politicized my statement is.
Yeah, I understand that. I think a lot of times with that type of like backlash that one may receive when it comes to work in activism, a lot of times I think that also just comes from like the whole misunderstanding thing. Not to say that it's not okay to disagree with someone, that's definitely okay. But I think in the way that you're showing that you disagree, or the way that you're expressing your other viewpoint or other opinions is definitely the like key to how it's delivered. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
Yeah, there's productive disagreement and there's unproductive disagreement. And it's really just depending on whether or not you want to open a dialogue and actually discuss things, or if you just want to attack somebody's beliefs. And they're very different. So one of them I would consider just disagreement, and the other I would consider backlash. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned this earlier though, but I was wondering, I know that you have worked with TEDx in the past, or is it currently or in the past? But
no, in the past. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I was wondering, how did you start doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I started working with TEDx actually when I was a freshman in college. I'd always, and maybe you could tell this through some of the other things I've said, but I've always loved creating connections between people and giving people platforms to speak about ideas that are important to them. And so the way that I wanted that to manifest in college is by getting involved with TEDx. I worked as a speaker liaison, I worked as a community director, and then eventually also worked as an executive director of the organization. And in each of those roles, I had different responsibilities, but in all of them, I was encouraging this idea of giving people a platform to speak about ideas that were important to them, and then giving the people that were speaking and the attendees a platform to speak with one another and continue to share and discuss those ideas. And the great thing about those ideas is that they were far ranging. There was a great variety of them, and students and the professionals that came and spoke at the school as well, really brought their own flavor to it. And that was just a really lovely experience.
Yeah. I definitely think that's pretty interesting. I know that a lot of times when what am I trying to say here? Sorry. But I was going to say that a lot of times with different TEDx videos that I've seen, it's interesting to see that you have worked with that in the past. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really cool getting to be a part of this like international platform and getting to have talks that were contributing to an international platform and getting to also be connected to such a large community. Um, it was really great. One of the things that I was really passionate about in all of my roles is that whatever we say is whatever our speakers say on stage and whatever we do as an organization can not only be shared on the stage but can be shared worldwide because of this platform that we're a part of. And that was really great to be able to connect ideas across the world like that. And there were definitely some of our speakers that were able to connect all around, and were able to like continue the conversation online, which was such a great thing to see as an organizer.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure that in that moment probably felt so proud about the fact that it was spreading across internationally, not just in the small space where the ideas were started from, I guess. Mm-hmm. So the last prompt is there one particular goal that you're trying to reach in regards to your activism work?
Another tough question, because it really depends on the activism space that we're talking about. Like, is it with my education work? Is it with my Palestine work? Is it with interfaith work, etc.? But I think that if I could boil down my thoughts from several different areas somehow into one, I'd say that I really want people to think more critically about why people are fighting for the things that they're fighting for. Like, I think that a level of empathy and understanding is something that sometimes lacks. And like I mentioned when I was talking about backlash, a lot of people will agree that, okay, simple statement, it is bad that children in this area are suffering, for example. But people will not agree and will fight so fervently and will not think critically about all of the why to that. And that's where so much disagreement happens. And that's where a lot of progress is halted, because people disagree so strongly about what the causes for this bad thing happening is, for example. And so I really want to see in the activism space, and I really want to encourage through my own activism to get people to think more critically about what are all of the causes for this happening. Like, we agree that there's a thing that is happening that is bad. What do we do to think critically about all the steps that led to that, to create an actual change so that those people that are suffering, that are at the losing end of whatever these policies are, or whatever is causing this misfortune, how do we start thinking about all those causes? And so in any space that I'm in, I think that thinking about the why is important, and encouraging people to have wider empathy and understanding, and to think outside of themselves is something that I want to encourage through my activism in every single space.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I don't think I've really ever like heard it in that sense before, but like thinking like of the whys and going down to like the root cause of the issue in the first place. And I think that was really good. But I think if people do begin to think about why it's happening in the first place, then that can definitely change perspectives and change and hopefully become like a long-term change overall. So that's really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this brings us to a close of the episode. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I definitely think that it was a good conversation that was had. And I just really appreciate you coming on and joining me. So thank you so much. And I hope to all my listeners that you also enjoyed this episode quite a lot. And so thank you.
Thank you so much, Dara.